There's one thing more than anything that I think people are searching for right now when they're looking to learn and grow on the internet and anywhere, in fact, is authenticity. Authenticity. It's something I've spoken about for many years. I'm about to share with you a recording that I did a few years ago, but also I just recently discovered that in the process of healing, what they found is scientifically the body shows recovery rates higher when somebody is living in a space of authenticity rather than trying to live through something that they're not, which is really profound. So enjoy this recording. I did it a few years ago. Hopefully you'll take some insight from it. Get a pen and paper out because I've given 4 things here that I think will help if you're somebody that's wanting to get out and communicate more authentically, both on a personal and a professional business level, even in relationships. Hey folks, it's Dr. Rowe. I hope you are well. My subject for this particular post is authenticity, more specifically authentic leadership. Now, this is a subject which is huge, and actually a lot of people ask questions about this. I just want to give you a bit of a brief definition. Worthy of belief and trust, and not a pair of glasses on a bald guy's head. So if you are in a business, or you happen to be in management, or you're just striving to become a leader in whichever area of your life it is, it could be leader in your own family, in your own household, in your community. I think it's a great conversation to have, particularly when we're talking about the subject of communication. The key message I want to get across here for those of you that are wanting to improve your communication skills. So when I'm teaching people communication and the overall system, one of the key things is when you're communicating with the other person is to maintain true north, that genuine sense of authenticity. So let's talk about authentic leadership and examples. So for me, it's about people that communicate in such a way that when they are talking, you have a really strong sense that they're on point, what they're saying they believe in, what they're saying they practice, that you get a sense that it's something that's in their gut rather than in their head. Have you ever had that situation where you're watching somebody, you're in a meeting, you're face to face with them, you're sat in an audience taking notes, you're watching somebody, and then a new person comes up to speak. It might be an event that you're at, and you're watching that person and you go, yeah, you know what? I don't quite relate to them. I don't feel that what they're saying they're aligned with. That's a classic case of somebody who is being a leader in that moment, because you can be a leader in any moment. You could be a leader in a small group situation where somebody's in trouble and you step in to help out. Equally, you could be a leader of a very large organization. And I've worked and gone in and worked with CEOs, heads of companies, small groups, large groups, etc. Spoken in front of tens of thousands of people at single events. And my experience is that people have a conflict. They want to say something, but at the same time, and if you relate to this, maybe you can put a comment on the post, but it's like you feel a little bit muted. You feel you have to say something to conform and to fit in. And this last 12, 18 months, as I'm recording this right now, this new cancel culture where people are now afraid to speak up about what they believe in because they might be cancelled or somebody might neg them out, is really scary, because what's happened to that authentic voice? Some people are dialing it down. If you said to me, what are some examples of what I, Dr. Rowe, believe are authentic leadership? I would say, and again, everyone's got their own views and opinions. You might watch this and go, I don't agree with you, Dr. Rowe, and that's your choice. And that's the beautiful thing about authentic leadership. I can make a statement, but at the same time say to you, just because it's my opinion, it doesn't have to be your opinion. And we'll come to this in a minute because I've got 4 points I want to put up on the screen for you in just a second. So let's pick somebody. Let's talk about podcasts. So most of you know that we have the Cicado Show. I have some amazing people come onto that. Dr. Rob Verkerk, for example. Dr. Rob Verkerk and Melanie Aldridge. They specifically run an organization, a non-for-profit organization called Alliance of Natural Health, ANH. And they do some incredible work around the field of health, vitality, looking after yourself. They write technical papers. They go up and represent government and organizations. I mean, we're talking about global influence here. In fact, Rob's influence and has some input into government practice around health, and had to sometimes go up head to head with pretty big organizations. If you meet him, he is no different to when you see him out speaking, when you see him on social media, or when I've interviewed him. He practices what he preaches. His message is about core looking after who you are emotionally, but also biologically. What you put in your mouth is a direct input on what comes output of what comes out of your body. And he practices that. Same thing with Mel. She's exactly the same. So when you're around them, you get this really strong sense of, oh my God, this is what they do. I went and had lunch and was filmed in August with them this year. And we all sat around a table. And it just felt like I was completely aligned with everybody there. It's that total alignment.
In the comedy world, someone like Dave Chappelle, some of you may be familiar with Dave Chappelle. Now, you may or may not like his humor, but he has stood by a set of values. And a lot of comedians and people in the industry, the entertainment industry, look and they're just, this is a guy that walked away from a $50 million opportunity when he had the Chappelle show, where they were going to pay him this money to run the show, but modify it, compromise his core values, try and make it a little bit more appealing to the general public. But that meant taking out some of the language, some of the type of things that he did on the Chappelle show involved talking about different races, different colors. He's a black guy and from America, and he's doing all this amazing humor. If you watch him, he's really very, very clever. And as he's got older, his communication is impeccable. I mean, I see it as just a very crafted, beautifully thought out, intelligent way of bringing comedy to the show. And I've been to see him. And if you watch, he is authentic all the way through. And in fact, if you see interviews with other comedians, they're like, he is the real deal. He does not compromise himself. He won't give himself up to big bucks, big profile. And that's led to him in some ways being challenged. So choosing that message is really important. We'll come back to that. Podcast, going back to podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience. Love it. Incredible. I mean, it's been running for a long time, probably arguably the most successful podcast in history and currently around. And yet, even for him, he's been challenged recently because he's having conversations about things like vaccination, should you or shouldn't you? But he's bringing people on to have intelligent, sensible, authentic conversations. And if you listen to the interviews, the message is genuinely coming from a core wanting to learn, wanting to believe, but leading audiences by saying, let's be open to different things, but let's also ask intelligent questions of what we're doing with our lives and the choices that we're making. You could go and look at people like Mahatma Gandhi, who practiced what he went through a massive protest by, if you remember the whole situation with the British government, etc., went through starvation, and he would protest and walk miles. He would walk with people. So instead of being, I am the leader, you need to do this, he would go and do what other people were doing. He would join people on the ground level in the protest. He would be part of that movement. Authentic leadership. Angelina Jolie, in the world of celebrity status, is somebody that has used her celebrity status to go out and bring I believe, a leadership message, gone out to countries, been part of that movement to help with various things to do with starvation and landmines and various other things around the world. Incredible influence. But through her using her status to have leadership and being authentic about that. So what does this boil down to? And you might be thinking, oh man, this is quite a big picture Dr. Rowe painting here. Let me just show you. This is what I believe it's all about. Any communication you do, and I want you to really think about this. If you're working for a company and you're trying to talk about what you do in front of people, there's a challenge, because if you don't believe in the thing that you are talking about, maybe you've got an issue with the company you're working for. Maybe you've got an issue with a product that you're offering and you're not completely aligned with it. If your core values of who you are as a person are not aligned with what you're saying, with the message that you're sharing and how you're showing up as a leader, then people will go, yeah, you know what? You say that, but you don't really seem to live that way. So that's the first point of contact for me when it comes down to true, authentic leadership. Is, are you actually living the core values of what your message is and what you're trying to encourage other people to do or to get involved with? Second one is, what's the message you're saying? Is what you're saying in alignment with other people's values, your values, and the bigger picture of what you're trying to achieve? Because you might be saying things that are hypocritical to the overall objective. And that comes out. I mean, people practicing certain things. And I heard this in an interview just recently about the conversation about vaccination with a doctor. And the doctor kind of tied himself a little bit in knots over his argument, because although he was saying one thing, it was almost like he was practicing something else. And, if you're going to be a leader in that field, you kind of need to align with that. So I think it's really important to make sure that what you're saying, the words you use, are aligned with the values that you have. If you value health, then you're going to practice and you're going to share the message of health. So think about the leadership process and what things you need to get across to help people. And then, of course, what's your representation of that? So that's what I'm talking about now, is how are you showing up? So you have a set of core beliefs, core values. You've got a message you're sharing out to the world. How are you representing that? How do people see you? How are you coming out to the world? How are you dealing with people? How are you managing your emotional state as a leader? How do you manage the business, the people around you, your communication with those people? If you're saying you need to be a good communicator, but you're not communicating yourself, that to me is a conflict. I've worked with companies who are really poor internally of communicating any issues that come up. And when egos come into a board level, for example, often you'll see two people not wanting to communicate about certain things because they've got their own separate agendas. And I often have had situations where I'm having two separate conversations with people. I'm thinking, well, why aren't they communicating? If you're going to be authentic, let's all just be transparent, which comes to number 4, open transparency. I think the great leaders of the world are transparent. They're open about what their strengths are and what their message is, but also about what their weakness is. And actually, this was an interview that I just recently heard with Joe Rogan, actually, which I thought was really interesting. And this is with one of the doctors that represents CNN. They were talking about vaccinations. And when Joe asked specific questions, what I thought was great is in the doctor's response, he said, I actually don't know the answer to that, or I actually agree with you. This is an area that still needs to be addressed. We don't know all the answers to this. And maybe there are messages coming out suggesting that we do by the media, but actually the reality is we don't. That was a really authentic response. It was it was a grappling of values, not wanting to be a conflict to his message, but at the same time aligning with his own values to say, look, transparency, we're not sure. We're not completely sure. And that's what really authentic communication is about. It's about making sure that when you get asked questions or when you're leading people, if you don't know the answer, you show that transparency, but you also show the will or the willingness to find the answer and then communicate that back through to the people around you. Okay, so it was a bit longer than I expected, that post, but hopefully that was valuable. Enjoy your authentic... Oh, and by the way, remember to follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Facebook. Dr. O signing out. See you on the next post.